The Woman in the Lake. There's a lake where my brother and I used to go fishing. We used live bait, usually crickets or worms, and we caught a lot of bluegill. It was a fun time, and some of those early memories are the reason I've been a passionate fisherman for much of my life. The lake wasn't the most popular fishing spot, even though it was well stocked, from what I remember. I think most locals found it inconvenient and hard to access unless you were willing to walk a bit through the woods, something my brother and I were always willing to do. The isolation was actually one of my favorite things about it, almost as if I was sharing a private activity that not everyone would get to experience. Everyone knows the best lake fishing happens during periods of low light, meaning early morning or late evening. It's more common to wake at dawn and head out early, but my brother and I developed the habit of going out later in the day and staying until nightfall. It was our substitute for what most teenagers did at that time on weekends, probably going out to parties and such. It was a Friday night, and everything was going according to plan. We arrived at the lake just as the sun was beginning to set, and by the time we finished preparing our bait, the sun had started to hide. We were positioned at the edge of the lake on a small rock formation that provided a comfortable surface for us and all our extra gear. It was something we had done hundreds of times. As we were fishing, something caught my attention on the opposite side of the lake. There was movement in the water, and from the ripples I was surprised it had taken me so long to notice. I pointed it out to my brother and we both stared, confused, wondering what was causing it. It's worth noting this lake was considerably large, and combined with the low visibility, it wasn't like you could see clearly to the other side. But then, as we were looking at the waves in the water, something happened that I would never expect, not even in my wildest dreams. A dark mass began to rise from the water, right where the waves were. And as it emerged, the assumption that it was a large fish was immediately dismissed. It wasn't a fish, it was too big and too upright. The only possible explanation was a person. Think how strange that is by itself. Not only was there a person literally in a private lake after sunset, but they had just been submerged below the surface. And not just that, they must have been down there for quite some time, otherwise we would have noticed sooner. It was scary enough to make my heart beat a little faster, and I felt an irresistible urge to leave. My brother didn't want to, though, saying we had just arrived and that the person in the lake was too far away to affect us in any way. I thought he wasn't wrong. So we spent the next few minutes watching the person in the lake, trying to rationalize the scene. They swayed from side to side almost hypnotically. Their movements weren't jerky or disjointed, but fluid, as if they were commanding the water around them rather than just cutting through it. Our fishing rods were practically ignored, just lying there as we both kept our attention fixed on the strange sight across the lake. Were they fishing? No, that seemed ridiculous. Fishing underwater? Never heard of that. My brother suggested that maybe they were swimming, which was plausible until I touched the surface of the lake with my hand and instantly pulled back. It was so cold. You'd have to be crazy to enjoy swimming in such low temperatures. With not much else to do besides ignore them and keep fishing, I snapped out of the trance and encouraged my brother to do the same. But when I looked at him, I realized he was much more engrossed, or much more scared than I was. Maybe both. Instead of following my advice, he stood there motionless, his lips slightly parted and his eyes fixed on the lake. He wasn't even holding his fishing rod anymore. I called his name a few times, frustrated, until he finally looked away, picked up his fishing rod, and with a slight tremor in his hand, apologized. And we both tried to resume fishing. However, it was pretty clear our attention was elsewhere. I'm not sure what I expected to happen. I guess I thought the person would eventually get out of the lake or notice us or do something different than just standing there. After a few minutes of casting and reeling without focus, my brother tapped my shoulder and said, "Look." I looked back at the lake and just in time saw the person submerge again, disappearing below the surface. I stared at the spot where they had been, expecting them to reappear at any moment. But they didn't. 1 minute passed, then another. Then I noticed my brother had his phone in his hand with a stopwatch running. When it passed 2 minutes, I grew increasingly surprised at how long they were holding their breath. My brother suggested that maybe it was someone training, and I almost laughed at the idea of an Olympic diver testing their lung capacity there in a freezing lake in the middle of nowhere after sunset. Suddenly, the idea didn't seem so funny, and I started packing our things, telling my brother we were leaving. But he helped me back, saying he wanted to see how long they could hold their breath. I said okay, but kept gathering our stuff. I felt the need to leave creeping up on me again. Before it reached 3 minutes, I noticed ripples in the water again, only this time they were much closer, about 1/5 of the distance from where they were before. The realization that this person had not only held their breath for almost 3 minutes, but had done so while swimming, was enough for me to raise my voice to my brother. This time he didn't argue, and we both stood up, preparing to leave, but we couldn't go just yet. The curiosity was too strong. My brother and I watched as the person began to emerge again, and this time we could see them clearly. To my total surprise, it was a woman, not a man, as I had imagined. She had long brown hair and was wearing a dark green swimsuit. And there was one more thing I need to mention. She was kind of pretty, didn't look much older than us, maybe a year or two if I had to guess. As soon as I saw her, I instantly felt intimidated, less scared. I also started thinking that maybe my brother and I had been hasty in wanting to leave. We were both still frozen in place, but she was the one who broke the silence. She flashed a seductive smile and said, "Hi," almost as if she was trying to be playful and cute, as if she hadn't just held her breath for 3 minutes while swimming in a freezing lake in the middle of nowhere. She was definitely a strong swimmer. That was obvious from the way she moved. She seemed as comfortable in the water as most people would be on dry land. I was stunned, too bewildered to speak, but my brother blurted out the question I was dying to ask. He asked what she was doing, and I had to remind myself that she was acting crazy, even if she seemed harmless. She tilted her head back and said that she was swimming. My brother replied, "Well, yeah, obviously," and asked if she was training for something. She gave us another provocative smile and said something like, "Kind of." Then she swam a little closer to us. Then she actually asked us if we wanted to join her, a complete absurdity. I spoke for the first time, asking if she was crazy and telling her the water was freezing. She laughed and called us weak, saying we'd get used to the temperature soon enough. My brother said no, and she started staring at us with her finger on her mouth as if thinking. I don't know if it was her bold attitude or the icy look in her eyes, but my internal alarm went off and I got scared again. There were so many things I wanted to ask. Who was she? Was she alone? How long had she been there? Did she live nearby? But I didn't ask. Instead, I just grabbed my brother's shoulder and told the pretty girl we were leaving. I'm not sure what I expected her to do, but I definitely didn't expect her to start screaming. She screamed no as loud as she could, and I stepped back out of pure shock. My brother and I made sure we weren't leaving anything behind, and we started running away from the lake. She kept screaming after us, calling for us to come back and get in the water. As if that wasn't scary enough, she just started screaming at some point. No words, just screams. It sounded like someone being stabbed. I could still hear her behind us when we were halfway to the car. Part of me expected her to get out of the water and start chasing us, but I don't know if she did. When we got to the car, my brother was already on the phone with the police. He told them what happened, and although they asked us to stick around for questioning, he said he didn't feel comfortable doing that and hung up. I probably would have done the same. That's how much I wanted to get out of there. You might think the experience would have discouraged us from continuing to fish there and put us off, but only for a short while. We actually went back a few times, but the first few times we made sure to take our dad with us. It took a while to convince him to believe us, but in the end he did. He was curious and wanted to see this strange girl for himself, but we never saw her again. For all we knew, the police might have found her and handled the situation their way. It became kind of a shared joke between my brother and me. It even got to the point where every time we went fishing at that lake, a part of us wanted to see her again. But now, as time has passed and that lake is no longer part of my life, I've started to recognize the strangeness and horror of it all. She was probably just mentally ill. That's the explanation I decided to accept. My brother has some interesting theories, but I find them all silly and unrealistic. Anyway, I doubt anything as inexplicable and strange as what happened that night will ever happen to me again.
The Thing in the Swamp. My name is John, and fishing is one of my greatest pleasures in life. I take every opportunity to get out on the water, whether it's a lake, river, or the local swamps. This happened about 2 months ago when I was with my friend Peter, who's just as obsessed with fishing as I am. We decided to fish in the swamp to try and catch some trout, something we'd done many times before. The swamps around here are pretty shallow, so we launched my kayak as we always do. It was early spring, so it was still a bit chilly outside, and the water was even colder, but we didn't mind. We'd been paddling for about 30 minutes when we found a good spot that looked promising. The swamp seemed completely empty that day, no other fishermen around, which was exactly how we like it. We cracked open a few beers and got right to fishing, just enjoying the peace and quiet. We'd been fishing for maybe an hour when Peter got a good bite, at least it seemed like it. As he was reeling it in, he got a little too excited and leaned over the side of the kayak to get a better angle. I knew what was about to happen a second before it did, but I couldn't get the words out in time. As he leaned over, I watched helplessly as his phone slid out of his jacket pocket and plunged into the murky water. Safe to say, Peter was as frustrated as ever. He said he had insurance that would cover phone damage, but not if it was completely lost. He said replacing it would cost several $100s he didn't have, and I didn't blame him one bit. I wasn't exactly rolling in money either. I told him we'd try to find the phone, even though the water was so murky you couldn't see more than a few inches below the surface. We spent the next 20 minutes in the same area, using the paddles to try and feel for anything hard on the bottom, but it was impossible. The swamp bottom was just mud and vegetation, and even though we'd both seen the phone fall into the water, we started second-guessing where we should be looking. Finally, I told Peter we weren't going to find it, and that we should try to salvage some enjoyment from the day. But he shook his head and said he wasn't leaving without that phone. Before I could stop him, Peter started taking off his shoes and pants. He said he was going into the swamp and would try to feel around for the phone with his feet. I didn't think it was a bad idea, actually. At least it was better than poking around with the paddles. The moment Peter stepped into the water, he let out a stream of curses about how cold it was. That part of the swamp was actually deeper than I expected, about 4.5 feet deep, judging by the water level on his body. But he was determined, so he started feeling around with his feet in the area where he thought the phone had fallen. I watched from the kayak, growing more impatient by the minute. The water was so cold, I knew Peter couldn't stay in there much longer, and I was hoping he'd either find the phone quickly or give up and get back in the kayak. But then, out of nowhere, Peter yelled and his whole body fell forward. 1 second he was standing in the water, and the next he was completely submerged. At first I thought maybe he'd slipped on the mud bottom, or maybe he'd actually found the phone and dove down to grab it. But after a few seconds without Peter resurfacing, I realized something was seriously wrong. I didn't even think. I started taking off my shoes and jacket, getting ready to jump in after him. Before I could enter the water, however, Peter burst up from the swamp, covered head to toe in filthy mud, and he was screaming for me to get us out of there as fast as possible. I helped pull him back into the kayak, and we started paddling away from that spot as fast as we could. Peter was shaking, and not just from the cold water, it seemed. He kept looking back over his shoulder at the water as if he expected something to be following us. Once we were a decent distance away, I asked him what had happened down there. Peter said that while he was feeling around for the phone with his feet, something grabbed his ankle and pulled him under. He struggled to describe what it felt like. He said it wasn't exactly a hand, but it also wasn't a tentacle or a set of teeth, just something that wrapped around his ankle with incredible strength. According to Peter, after he went under, whatever it grabbed him tried to drag him away from where we were fishing. He said he fought with everything he had, kicking and thrashing, until he managed to break free. We decided to call it a day and headed back to the dock. Even though Peter hadn't found his phone, that was clearly not on his mind. The whole way back, he barely said a word. I kept trying to convince him that maybe it had been a large catfish or an alligator that grabbed him, But in the end, I wasn't the one who felt it, so I couldn't convince him of anything. Peter insisted that what grabbed him didn't feel like any fish or animal he'd ever encountered. He was so unsettled and agitated that I honestly started getting scared myself. I mean, what could that thing have been? My mind started to wander, and it didn't lead anywhere good. I fished those swamps for years and never experienced anything like what Peter described. Even though I did some research online, I never found anything conclusive. Part of me wants to go back to that spot and see if we can figure out what's down there, but I'm not eager to do that anytime soon. I will say that every time I've gone fishing in the swamp since then, I feel a sense of unease that should never accompany something as pleasurable as fishing. This story happened about 2 months ago, and I still think about it from time to time.
The abandoned boat in the reservoir. It was me, Carla, Raphael, and Mariana, the usual crew for our weekend adventures. We were looking for something to do on a Saturday afternoon, and Raphael mentioned a reservoir near Mariana's house that we'd been to a few times before. It was a classic spot for our group of friends. Raphael and I knew there was plenty of fish there, so we were excited to get some fishing in, since we were both pretty passionate about it. Carla and Mariana were more excited about having some drinks by the water and maybe taking a swim if they were feeling adventurous. Mariana's house was out in the sticks, and the reservoir was about a 10-minute drive away, followed by a short walk down a trail through the trees. It was public property, which was clear from the various no trespassing signs posted on the wire fence surrounding it. But Mariana had made a hole in the fence a long time ago. We always laughed about it when we went there, joking that we had found the perfect hidden spot that no one else knew about. The reservoir itself was small, surrounded by dense woods on 3 sides and an access road on the 4th. The water was crystal clear, and there was a small sandy area where we always set up our stuff. We called it the beach because of the sand and the flat rocks perfect for lying on. It was a really great spot, and since it was so isolated, we could play music loud and talk without worrying about bothering anyone. The sun was already setting when we slipped through the fence. Raphael and I started setting up the fishing gear, even though we probably weren't going to do much serious fishing. The girls laid out a blanket and started drinking. The vibe was great, especially since I had a bit of a crush on Mariana, and Raphael seemed interested in Carla. While the 2 girls were talking about going for a swim, Carla pointed out something none of us had noticed before. She narrowed her eyes and asked if we saw that boat further along. We all looked in the direction she was pointing. Sure enough, a little further along the shore, there was a small boat caught in the reeds near the water's edge. It was positioned strangely, as if it had just floated there untied. The weird thing was, we'd been to this reservoir dozens of times over the last year, and none of us had ever seen that boat before. Raphael and I, being the curious types, decided to go check it out. The girls seemed more interested in the music and drinks, so they waved us on. The walk along the shore took about 3 minutes. As we got closer, I realized something was wrong. It wasn't just an empty boat. It looked like someone had been using it recently and had just left it there. There was a fishing rod with the lines still in the water, an open tackle box as if someone had been rummaging through it, and even a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in plastic on the seat. But the strangest thing was the cell phone. It was right there on the main seat, locked, but with the flashlight on. I pointed it out to Raphael and asked, who would leave their phone like that? He shrugged, but I could tell he was thinking the same thing. Everything else, the fishing gear and even the snack, could have a simple explanation. Maybe the person heard us approaching, realized they were in a restricted area, and ran off before getting caught. But no one would leave a functional phone behind, no matter the reason. I looked at Raphael, then back at the boat, trying to take it all in. I know it might not sound that scary now, but in the moment, it was one of the strangest things I've ever seen. If you were there, you would have felt the same. There was still enough light to see anyone who might be around, but there was no one. Raphael commented on how creepy it was, and I totally agreed. We headed back to the girls and told them what we found. The more I described what we saw, the more uneasy I felt. I
I remember looking back at the boat gently rocking in the water and feeling a bad premonition grow inside me. We talked for a few minutes, trying to find an explanation, but nothing made sense, especially because of the phone. Carla said she wanted to leave, and I agreed. The whole situation was giving me a terrible feeling. We started packing up our things when Mariana's eyes widened and she pointed across the reservoir. I followed her gaze and had to look twice to be sure of what I was seeing. On the other side of the water, a person was standing with the water lapping at their knees. Even with the sun setting, we could see clearly. The person was holding something long in their hands, maybe a fishing rod or a stick. But what really scared me was the fact that they were completely still, facing directly towards us. That's when I realized they were watching us, and had probably been doing so for some time. Suddenly, the discomfort from finding the abandoned boat turned into fear. No one said anything, but we were all thinking the same thing. We needed to get out of there immediately. We grabbed our stuff and started walking quickly toward the fence. We weren't running, but almost. Then the thing I feared most happened. The person started screaming, telling us to get out of there. That's exactly what we were doing, but they didn't seem to care. They were shouting and cursing aggressively like a madman. I thought it couldn't get any worse, until I saw it just in time, when they dropped what they were holding and started moving forward into the water. It took me 2 seconds to realize what was happening. They were swimming towards us. I yelled for my friends to run, and everyone took off. We sprinted to the hole in the fence and scrambled through it as fast as we could. I was the last one, and as I was crawling through, I heard the sound of water splashing behind us. As soon as we were out, the four of us jumped into the car and drove away as quickly as possible. For the next 20 minutes, we sat in Mariana's garage trying to make sense of what had happened. Carla was really shaken up, and Raphael was trying to calm her down, but it wasn't helping much. She was almost crying, and I don't blame her. I was scared too. No one knew what to think. I wondered if the person who yelled at us was the owner of the boat, and if so, why was the boat on the other side of the water, and why were they in the reservoir? Or worse, had that person done something to the boat's real owner? But as Mariana pointed out, that didn't make much sense, since he chased after us and drew attention to himself. Carla wanted to call the police, but what would we say? That we had trespassed on a restricted area, found an abandoned boat, and someone told us to get out. It wasn't a good idea. It's been a few months since the incident, and we haven't been back to the reservoir. Part of me wants to go back to find out what really happened, but I haven't been able to convince anyone to go with me. It's probably for the best. I still can't forget how terrifying the whole thing was.
The haunted new house. I'm still trying to understand what happened to us in our old house. For years, something was there that scared all of us. I don't even know how to describe what it was. It's been very difficult for us to talk about it as a family. One of my relatives still insists nothing happened and that we're all just making it up. The other 4 family members know it was real, but they don't want to discuss it. It's like they want to pretend it never existed. What really confuses me is how this could happen in a new house. We were literally the first family to live there. The house was built on an empty plot of land, and we moved in shortly after construction was completed. Before that, we had lived several states away. So it's not like we brought anything from our previous home. My dad went ahead first to set everything up. Then he came back to get me and take me to the new place. But I keep wondering if perhaps something was already on that land before we built our house, or if there's some other explanation I'm missing. On the first night I arrived at the new house, my father started feeling unwell. So we rushed him to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him. After that, the rest of my family moved to join us. I don't remember exactly when it all started, but I'll tell you about the strange things we heard. My mother and father heard scratching coming from inside the house walls, and they also heard people whispering while they were trying to sleep,
Then one time my father heard what sounded like several different voices talking. When he started to open his eyes to see what was happening, the voices fell completely silent. One day my mother was walking down the stairs, as she always did. Suddenly, she fell and tumbled all the way down. When we asked what happened, she said it felt like someone had pulled her feet out from under her. She wasn't carrying anything heavy or running, but the most disturbing part of all was what happened to my baby sister. She was still an infant, maybe 8 or 9 months old, and we had put a baby monitor in her room so my parents could hear if she needed anything during the night. But instead of just hearing her babbling or crying normally, my parents started hearing strange sounds through the monitor. They could hear what sounded like an adult voice talking to her. They immediately ran to her room, but when they got there, the door was completely stuck. They were pushing and pulling the doorknob, but it was as if something was holding the door from the inside. My father had to strain really hard to get it open. When they entered, my poor baby sister was standing in her crib, crying. As for my brother's room, he had a large old mirror that originally came with the furniture set. When we moved, they tried to place it on top of the dresser as intended, but the ceiling wasn't high enough and the mirror stuck up too far. So instead of returning it or discarding it, they put it in his closet and leaned it against the back wall. One night, my brother was lying in bed when he heard the closet door creaking. At first, he thought it was just the house settling or something. But when he looked over, he saw a dark figure emerging from that old mirror they had put there. He described it as something like an evil creature, a scary shadow that seemed to be stretching toward him. He was so terrified that he jumped out of bed and ran down the hall to my room, probably waking up half the house in the process. When he burst into my room, I was in that state of deep sleep where you can barely think straight. He was trying to tell me what he had seen, but honestly, I just wanted to go back to sleep. I probably wasn't very sympathetic. I just mumbled something like, "Go back to your room," and rolled over. I regret not taking him seriously. The next day, he dragged that mirror out of the closet and put it somewhere else in the house. And after he moved it, the closet door never opened by itself again. As for me, it all started during what was supposed to be a fun game of family hide and seek. I thought I was being really clever, hiding in the closet in my room. I crouched in there for what felt like forever, probably almost an hour in total darkness, waiting for someone to find me. A few days later, I developed a horrible cough that wouldn't go away no matter what. My parents were very worried and took me from doctor to doctor. They tried everything: prescription cough medicines, inhalers, antibiotics, you name it. Nothing worked. This lasted almost a full year, and only when we were getting desperate did it suddenly stop as mysteriously as it had begun. We never found the cause. It was just one of the many strange things that happened during that time. After that, things in the house started moving. At first, it was just small items. Things would be in different places from where we left them. Then whatever it was started messing with my radio. This radio had knobs you had to turn by hand to adjust the volume, and it had a light that showed the volume level. I liked to sleep with the radio playing soft music, but at night the volume would start turning by itself, slowly at first, as if someone was trying to get my attention. Then suddenly, the volume would jump to maximum, so loud it would wake me up. I had to jump out of bed and turn the volume back down. The only way to make it stop was by turning off the light in my room. When the light was off, it would stop playing by itself. Then I started having very strange dreams where I was trapped inside our house. In these dreams, I couldn't leave whatever room I was in. The doors weren't locked, but they were stuck and wouldn't open. no matter how hard I tried. When I flipped the light switches, they moved normally, but no light would turn on. Everything stayed dark. Sometimes in the dreams, I could open a door, but when I went into other rooms, the lights didn't work there either. The whole house would be dark, with no one else around, just me, alone. The strange thing is, I wasn't the only one having these dreams. My brother and sister were having the exact same dream about being trapped in our house with no lights and no other people. We'd wake up and tell each other about the dreams, and they were all the exact same. The strangest thing that happened was when I was putting away clean towels and sheets in a linen closet that faced the staircase. My father was with me, and we both heard footsteps running very fast up the stairs toward my brother's room. We could actually see someone running up there too. Then we heard the bedroom door slam shut. I went to check my brother's room and open the door, but there was no one there. I came back downstairs and found my brother in the kitchen washing dishes. So there was no way it could have been him. He was standing there with soapy hands. Before all the scary things happened with my baby sister, we had picked up a couch someone had left by the roadside. It looked fine when we found it. But after we brought it home, my mother found a dark reddish-brown stain on it that wouldn't come out, no matter what she tried to clean it with. But soon after that terrible incident with my baby sister, my parents decided they'd had enough. They immediately dragged the couch out to the curb for trash collection. My mother was convinced it had brought something evil into our home. My father, who has always been very religious, decided he needed to do something more than just get rid of the couch. He got his old leather Bible and several cups that he filled with pure white vinegar from the kitchen. I saw him going through every room of the house, murmuring prayers and blessings in Spanish. I couldn't really understand as my Spanish wasn't that good. He seemed to know exactly what he was doing, as if his grandmother or someone had taught him this ritual years ago. When he finished going through the house, he carefully took one of the cups and told us we needed to place it somewhere no one would touch or move it. We decided the safest place was under my bed. I had a really cool custom-made bed that my father had built for me when we moved. It had built-in shelves on the sides and a hidden storage compartment right in the center under the mattress. That's where we put the cup of vinegar, right in the corner where no one could accidentally knock it over. We pretty much forgot about it for months after that. Life went on, and honestly, things seemed calmer at home. But one day, maybe 6 or 7 months later, I was looking for something under my bed and remembered the cup was there. When I pulled it out, I couldn't believe what I saw. The vinegar was no longer liquid. It had turned into a solid, jelly-like substance. It was still clear, but it had the consistency of thick gelatin. Being a curious teenager, I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. Carefully, I took the cup and brought it to school the next day. My science teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, always encouraged us to bring interesting things from home. When I showed her the solidified vinegar and explained what it was, she got really excited and asked if she could run some tests on it. She used a sterile cotton swab to collect a small sample and placed it in one of those petri dishes with a special culture medium.
We labeled it and put it in the incubator along with other science experiments. I checked on it every day after school, and at first, nothing happened. But after about 4 days, I walked into the classroom and saw that disgusting, fuzzy black stuff growing all over the sample. Mrs. Rodriguez said it was some kind of black mold, but she had never seen anything like it before. That was really strange because we never had a problem with black mold in our house. Maybe the sample picked up some mold somewhere between our house and the school lab. After my father performed the religious cleansing, most of the scary things stopped happening, but we still had some issues. We kept having those strange dreams of being trapped in dark rooms. Things would still disappear and show up in different places, and whatever it was would still mess with my radio sometimes. But it happened from time to time.
not constantly like before. The Man and the Little Dog. I'm 17 now, but this happened when I was 13, and it changed how I see people. Back then, I lived with my mom, and she worked double shifts at the hospital. So I spent a lot of time alone, and running became my activity that summer. It gave me something to do and got me out of the house. I was a scrawny girl with hair that never stayed in place, 13 years old. It's a weird age anyway, but I felt especially awkward. Too old to play with toys, too young to do anything interesting. The neighborhood was huge, maybe 100 houses spread across different sections. We lived on the east side, near the back, where the newer houses were built. And there was a main road that curved through the whole development, connecting all the smaller streets. That Tuesday in July was hot, but not unbearable. I started my usual route, heading west towards the main road. I was maybe 10 minutes into my run when I saw him, an older man walking a dog that had a bright pink leash and harness. The contrast was striking. This large man, probably about 6 feet tall, with a dog that couldn't have weighed more than 4 or 5 pounds. He looked to be in his late 40s or 50s, and had the kind of build that suggested he used to be athletic. As I got closer, the little dog completely captured my attention, and I couldn't help but smile. The man stopped walking and smiled back. "Would you like to pet her?" I slowed to a stop without really thinking about it. The dog was wagging its whole body, not just its tail, and looked at me with those shiny black eyes. "Sure, if it's okay, of course. Her name is Princess." I knelt down and let the dog sniff my hand before gently scratching behind her ears. Her fur was incredibly soft, and she leaned into my touch. "She really likes you," the man said, smiling. "How old is she?" 7 years old. I've had her since she was a puppy." It had been a while since I felt so relaxed around a stranger. Most men made me nervous, but people with dogs usually seemed safe. My mom always told me that people who were good with animals were usually good people. I gave Princess one last pat and started to stand up. "I should probably go. Thanks for letting me pet her." But as I turned to continue my run, the man spoke again. "Do you live in the neighborhood?" Something in his tone made me stop. It wasn't the question itself. Neighbors asked each other that sort of thing all the time. But the way he asked it, with an intensity that seemed unnecessary for casual conversation, made me uncomfortable. I felt a small knot form in my stomach. I took a step back, trying to seem natural. "Yeah, somewhere around here." Now, the neighborhood was huge, so I thought the vague answer would be safe enough. But I could see him processing my response, and he didn't seem satisfied. "Where exactly?" My heart started beating faster. Normal neighbors didn't ask like that. Normal dog walkers said, "Thanks," and went on with their day. I took another step back, this time not caring if it seemed obvious. "Near the front," I lied, pointing vaguely towards the older section of the neighborhood. He nodded slowly, still studying my face. "They have nice houses up there," he said. Every instinct was telling me to run, but a misplaced sense of politeness kept me there. I was 13, and I still believed I had to be nice to adults, even when they made me feel wrong inside. "I walk Princess up there sometimes, so maybe I've seen you before." I ran the same route 3 times a week and had never seen him. "Maybe," I said, "but I really should go. I'm supposed to be home soon." Then suddenly he smiled. It wasn't the friendly smile from when I was petting Princess, but something that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Do you have a boyfriend?" Without hesitation, I raised my voice. "I won't tolerate this," I shouted loud enough for neighbors several houses away to hear. His expression changed instantly. Princess was startled by the sudden outburst, and for a moment I felt bad for scaring her. I ran towards the front of the neighborhood. My life might have depended on it. All the horror movies I had ever seen told me not to look back, and for the first time, that seemed like good advice. When I reached the main road leading to the front section, I kept going. If he was following me, I wanted him to think I really lived there. I waited for another few minutes, listening for footsteps, voices, or anything that suggested I was being followed. And when I was sure I was alone, I started the long way back home, but I didn't take the direct route. At one point, I had to climb a low fence and crawl under a deck to get into a backyard and cut through to the alley behind it. It took me almost 20 minutes to do this, twice as long as it should have. When I reached our street, I was exhausted and paranoid, checking over my shoulder every few steps. I never saw him again. We lived there for 3 more years, and I kept running the same routes, but he never showed up. Sometimes I wondered if I had imagined how threatening he seemed, but the memory never faded, the way my instincts screamed danger and the wrongness of his questions. 4 years later, I know I was right to run.
The shadow in the living room. This happened 2 nights ago, and I'm still pretty shaken up about it. I woke up around 3 a.m., and my husband was working the night shift at the hospital. I rubbed my eyes thinking, great, another night staring at the ceiling until dawn. But as I sank back into my pillow, I felt this really unsettling feeling in my gut. That feeling when you think someone is behind you, but you're too scared to turn around? And before you ask, no, I hadn't watched any horror movies or read scary stories before bed. Then suddenly, I heard someone whisper something very softly. I could barely hear it, but it was clear enough to make me feel scared and cold all over. I sat up in bed and tried to listen. The sound seemed to be coming from outside my bedroom. I started sweating heavily, and my pajamas were completely soaked. "Hello?" I called out, but no one answered. I tried to tell myself I was just imagining things, but I was also curious. Since I was home alone, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. But I kept that comforter wrapped tightly around me like armor. There was no way I was facing whatever it was without some kind of protection, even if it was just my old cotton blanket. I started creeping down the hallway. The whisper was getting clearer. Now I could almost make out words, but not quite. It was driving me crazy, and there was definitely light spilling out from the living room. This strange bluish glow that definitely wasn't from any lamp I'd left on. Finally, I mustered the courage to peek around the corner into the living room. And there, in the dark corner next to our reading lamp, was this figure, just standing there. It wasn't exactly a person, but like a person-shaped shadow that was somehow darker than the darkness around it. Sweat started dripping down my arms and back. Even my hair was wet from sweating so much. I couldn't breathe properly, and I couldn't move. The whisper was very faint. Then, the shadow suddenly moved toward my grandmother's old mirror on the wall. My arms felt like jelly, and my knees were completely numb with fear. I scrambled back to my bedroom faster than I've ever moved in my entire life. I'm talking Olympic speed here. I was scrambling forward on my hands and knees so frantically that I hit the door frame and scraped my shins. I was still in that gross, sweat-soaked pajama set, but there was no way I was getting out from under the covers to change. I just lay there trembling like a chihuahua, clutching my phone and listening for any sound. Every little creak of the house settling made me jump. I stayed buried under those covers until I could see actual sunlight creeping through my blinds. When my alarm went off at 6:30, I immediately called my manager and told him I had food poisoning or something. There was no way I could function at work after that. My voice was still shaking when I left the voicemail. I probably sounded like I'd been up all night crying, which honestly wasn't far from the truth. This is the first scary thing like this that's happened in my house, and I had to tell someone about it. We only moved into this house a month ago. Does anyone have any ideas to help me? I'm really, really scared. I'm also thinking about setting up some cameras around the house. This happened 2 nights ago, and I'm still kind of freaked out about it.
The Intruders on Christmas Eve. At the time, I lived in a very spacious wooden house. The holiday season has always been my favorite time of year because my family would gather at someone's house and celebrate together. Living alone, this was always something I looked forward to. I didn't mind being alone, but it was nice to see friends and family from time to time. Since I lived in a relatively large house, our small family usually gathered either at my place or my brother's, typically alternating each year. That year was my turn to host everyone. Most of my family lived very far away, which made for a long car journey or an expensive flight. Even so, everyone usually tried to arrive on Christmas Eve. So on December 23rd, I called my brother to confirm everything was set. He informed me that our parents might only arrive on Christmas morning due to a flight delay, but that he was driving and should arrive on Christmas Eve night. I wished him a safe trip, said goodbye, and went to sleep. If you've ever lived far up north, you know the winters are very cold and very long. Snowstorms can form suddenly and last for a long time. That said, the next day, a heavy blizzard covered the ground early in the morning, and strong winds picked up in the afternoon. I got a call from my brother around 6 p.m. saying he would have to stay in a hotel that night because the snowstorm had covered the roads. I agreed it was the safest decision, although I was a bit upset about spending the day before Christmas alone. I tried to stay positive, thinking about Christmas Day with the whole family. By 10 p.m., I got ready for bed and set an early alarm for 5 a.m. in case my parents arrived earlier. The howling wind outside made it hard to sleep because it shook the entire room and made the whole house creak. But as I lay there, awake and irritated, a soft, rhythmic sound approached from outside the house. The wind was blowing in all directions at random speeds, which made the gentle 1-2 rhythm of footsteps stand out. The steps were slow, as expected in such weather, but they continued until they reached the wall on the left side of my house. I lay still there, my eyes wide open, listening to this strange person walking around during a storm in the middle of the night. Many thoughts raced through my mind, like total confusion and fear of a possible attack. However, I started thinking it might be my brother. Maybe something had happened and his phone had lost signal. Maybe he couldn't find a place to stay. The more I thought about it, the more I felt I needed to find a way to see who it was. In weather like that, no one could last more than an hour outside without serious consequences. And I definitely didn't want my brother and his family stuck out there. As I was putting on heavier clothes, there was a knock downstairs. The strange thing was, it was just a single knock, and it didn't come from the front door. Carefully, I opened my bedroom door and looked down the staircase. It was too dark to see anything, but I didn't want to give away my position in case it was someone dangerous. So I left the lights off. I went down the stairs almost in the dark, still trying to hear footsteps or any sound, but I heard nothing except the strong wind. When I got downstairs, I went to the front door. Even though the knock didn't seem to have come from there, I wasn't quite sure what to do. I can't explain why, but that's when I really started to get nervous, actually scared. I don't usually scare easily, but something felt very wrong. Approaching the door quietly, I leaned over and slightly moved the small curtain next to the glass. There was a man standing there, looking at the door. He seemed calm and expressionless, but as soon as he noticed me, he started screaming, asking for help, pounding on the glass and staring straight into my eyes. I immediately recoiled, not expecting such a sudden reaction. My heart started pounding hard in my chest. The man didn't look well. He seemed disturbed and had one hand in his pocket as if he was hiding something. I didn't feel comfortable opening the door at all, but I also didn't want this man's blood on my hands for not helping during a storm like that. "What happened? How did you get here?" I shouted. There was a pause for a few seconds before the man responded calmly. "I got lost. I just need a place to shelter." This change in his attitude was alarming. I stood there thinking for a while before the man asked me to let him in again. Then he asked again and again, each time more aggressive until he started hitting the door, punching it nonstop. I ran to another room to get my gun, which I kept at home for defense. Then I returned to the front door but stayed a good distance away and held my ground, hoping he would leave if I ignored him. He kept pounding for well over a minute, but as I stood there anxiously waiting, I heard the sound of snow being crunched again, footsteps going around my house. Realizing at that moment that this was definitely a bad situation, I ran upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom. Soon after, I heard two men starting to talk, and then I heard glass shattering and footsteps entering my house. The footsteps spread out across the downstairs. I heard things being moved and objects falling before someone started coming up the stairs. My bedroom was the only room upstairs besides a small bathroom and a closet. Trembling uncontrollably and praying in my mind, I raised the gun and aimed it at the door as a man approached on the other side. "He must be in here," he shouted, almost in a cheerful tone. He punched the door. The sound was heavy, as if he had hit it with a hammer or maybe even a gun. I couldn't help but let out a small gasp of fear. The man let out a sick laugh. Then the other man downstairs shouted something, and the footsteps of both men faded away. I sat there holding the gun aimed at the door for probably 15 minutes, listening only to the sound of the strong wind downstairs. After checking the house carefully, I made sure they were gone and placed a wooden board over the broken window to keep the snow out. The men had taken some expensive items from the house and left a mess, but no other damage was done. The storm had subsided by morning, and I informed my family and the police about what happened. My brother was angry with himself for not being there for me, but I assured him I was okay and that he had made the right decision not to drive during the snowstorm. Even though I went through the most frightening moment of my entire life, I ended up having a very nice Christmas with my family. People are cruel and terrible these days. And to do something like that, to put someone in a situation like that, especially at this time of year, is an absurd level of madness.
The haunting that followed. Fear had become the only constant presence by my side, filling every corner of the house like a heavy fog that wouldn't disperse, not even in the light of day. I locked doors, checked windows, tested the locks until my fingers ached, as if that could stop what had been tormenting me. But deep down, I knew none of it mattered, because what was haunting me didn't need doors to get in. On one of those silent nights, when I looked at the clock for the third time in just a few minutes, I saw Ursula standing in the hallway, smiling in a way that was not human. I blinked, and she was gone. The next day, upon entering the bedroom, I found Leonardo's wedding ring on the perfectly made pillow. The metal was ice cold, so real and solid that my hands trembled. I didn't know if it was a warning, a perverse trophy, or just another reminder of the hole I had dug myself. Seeking answers I knew I wouldn't find, I went to Leonardo's grave. The sky was heavy and gray, and as the cold wind hit my face, I noticed a note tucked under a stone. "This doesn't end here." The handwriting was the same as the previous message, as if death had restored his ability to write. Back at the apartment, while trying to make tea, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Footsteps I had recognized long before the tragedy. Then, Ursula's voice hummed a childhood song, calling my name as she did when we were close. The cup fell from my hand and shattered on the floor, but I didn't have the courage to look back. Every shadow stretched as if wanting to touch me. Every noise seemed to come from inside my head, and also from outside, from whatever was crossing the boundaries of the invisible. Over time, my body began to yield to the constant tension. My eyes burned, my skin seemed to carry the weight of sleepless nights. One early morning, while washing my face, I saw Leonardo's reflection in the mirror, standing behind me. When I turned, the bathroom was empty, but his scent lingered in the air. In the hallway, a slender shadow moved too fast to be human. Distant laughter echoed through the living room, like distorted memories of moments that no longer existed. When I opened the closet, I found Ursula's clothes hanging among mine, as if she had never stopped living there. It was as if they were rebuilding a life inside mine, using every piece of my guilt as a brick. Sitting on the floor at dawn, holding the ring so tightly it almost hurt my palm, I realized it didn't come from the cemetery. It came from me, from my rage, my resentment, the desire for destruction I had allowed to grow. On the last morning of that suffocating sequence, I looked out the window and saw something that made my heart stop. Ursula and Leonardo were on the street, their backs to me, holding hands. It wasn't an illusion, nor a reflection. It was a presence. They turned slowly in unison and looked directly at me. There was no hatred, no pain, no remorse, just a profound emptiness, as if they were incomplete versions of what they once were. In that moment, I understood they weren't haunting my house. They were reclaiming the place I had given them in my life. I had opened the door with my choices, and now there was no way to expel them. What stood before me wasn't just a haunting, but the result of everything I had let grow within my own heart.
The Endless Torment. The night always had its own weight, but on that particular one, the air seemed to bend around me, as if the apartment was breathing along with me, trying to sync with my weary sighs. I no longer feared what was hidden in the shadows. What frightened me now was the idea that I might have grown accustomed to them. The dim lamp in the living room pulsed from time to time, and with each flicker, it revealed a detail that wasn't there before. A darker shade on the wall, a nearly imperceptible tremor in the floor, a low noise I couldn't distinguish between plumbing and a whisper. I took a deep breath, hoping to find some remnant of courage, but found only the emptiness of someone who no longer knows where fear ends and habit begins. It was in that moment that I spoke, inviting whatever was there to finally reveal itself, and the silence that answered seemed to smile. The stain appeared as a response, slow and confident, spreading across the wall as if fully aware that I no longer had the strength to face it. The darkness dripped downward, but didn't fall. It seemed to cling to the concrete like long fingers stretching toward me. That's when I realized this wasn't a natural phenomenon, not a common sign of dampness, but something that carried intention. The air grew denser, almost pasty, and I had the sensation that the entire room was tilting toward that growing shadow. I retreated without realizing it, my feet dragging on the floor, my body seized by a chill that climbed up my neck and settled at the base of my skull. My mind screamed to run, and my body obeyed too late. By the time I locked myself in the bedroom, I already knew this wasn't a warning. It was an arrival. The bedroom door seemed to vibrate, as if something on the other side was breathing in rhythm with the wood. And then the stain began to form again, now on the inside, appearing like an eye opening to analyze me. I felt observed by something that had no face, and yet seemed to know every detail of me. I sat on the edge of the bed, pressing my hands against my face, trying to control my breathing, but the despair came in waves. It was impossible to deny that I had called all of this, that the ritual I performed hadn't been a harmless experiment, but an open door to something that wasn't born to be invited. The guilt weighed heavily, but alongside it was an ancient, buried anger that still pulsed with too much force, and this toxic mixture was the perfect fuel for what now lived here with me. Memories of Ursula and Leonardo flashed like snapshots, as if the apartment itself was reminding me why it all began. Their smiles, once so familiar, now seemed mocking, almost complicit in my ruin. It was strange how the mind distorted everything when the pain refused to die. And deep down, no matter how wrong it was, I still clung to that pain as if it were the last thing keeping me conscious. The stain no longer advanced, as if it were waiting, observing, studying my thoughts. I stopped trying to understand. I stopped trying to fight. I just stayed there, staring at the shadow, listening to its breath mix with mine, and accepting that this was the new rhythm of my life. When dawn touched the window, nothing had improved. The light only revealed that the stain was still there, static, like an open wound in the wood of the door. I rose slowly and went to the window, not quite knowing why. Outside, the world went on as normal. Cars passing, distracted people, the distant noise of the city waking up. And there I was, standing still, feeling like someone who had left a debt unpaid. Because I knew it wasn't over. I knew that what I had summoned was still lurking, waiting for the next move. And when they finally knock on my door again, it won't be to scare me. It will be to collect. All that's left for me is to wait.